All right. Why don't we get going? So if you're off, if you're got to run to the printer to pick up your slides, just go for it and do it. We're going to get started here on our topic for today, which is what does or doesn't your visualization tell you? And it's not even so much about what it tells you, what does it tell the user? So that's our activity for today. But first, the usual reminders. Go ahead and type in questions if you like. We prefer today, if possible, that you can just chime in by voice, and we're going to do a lot of unmuting of people to make sure that happens. We may, if you find yourself on mute on our end and you want to be unmuted, do send us a note. It may be the case that we've detected a lot of sound on your end and may have muted you. But we can unmute you for sure. And if you just don't want to do that and want to type in questions, we'll be manning the question box carefully to try to make sure that we got a lot of feedback as we go on this. So the next thing here is, let's see, not letting me advance. Oh, today's agenda. So first we sent out an email, but we will have an update on the deadline for complying with the financial transparency part of ESSA law. First, we'll cover that. Then we're going to spend the bulk of our time on this visualization activity, and then a few updates, including an update on the next meeting, which is June 20th, and what we're planning, a few other updates as well. So first, kind of a drum roll, if you will, update on the deadline. So you may remember that we had been saying that the deadline, since the regulations went away, the default deadline is basically December 2018 for the 2017-18 school year. That was our interpretation of the law as it was written in the context of old school report card reporting structures and so on. And what we've heard now from a few conversations with the department is that the department is not defaulting to December as the deadline, and that the department is looking hard at releasing some more guidance that will update the deadline. And so here we have the update is there might be an update on the deadline coming. So, and that's literally what we heard. We said, can we tell people there will be guidance coming? And they said, you can tell people that we are reviewing it. And I think that's because they have lawyers and everybody looking at the law and what the parameters are, given that they can't issue new regulations. But all this is to say, please do not accept the December date as the final ruling on the deadline. We know the department is working very hard on looking at all options with giving more flexibility around that deadline. And we know that there is at least an intent to come out with something definitive on this soon. So the update is there's an update possibly coming. So I know that's not much of an update, but we just wanted to pass that on since we had communicated December, and we won't do that again.
And there's a question here, is the department also going to share guidance on other things in addition to the deadline? Understanding is that they are reviewing many different components, and so there may be guidance beyond deadline guidance. There might be guidance and then no deadline guidance. So we're hoping to have something soon.
The one other big area, Ryan, where we think they will try to say something is on this disaggregate by federal, state, and local. They realize that most SEAs, maybe all, are going to have a very hard time separating state and local money. And so they're just looking at what their options are as a department, because the regulation process is a big process. It triggers all sorts of public feedback. You can't issue regulations that were substantially similar to previous regulations. And so the regulation process is one that is somewhat onerous. And I think they're hesitant to go through the regulation process again. So they're trying to figure out what flexibility they have outside the official regulation process to offer clarifications, I believe, with the goal that clarifications would make things easier on states. And, you know, these are our interpretations. It's not official Department of Ed positions. But the idea there is that they would like to be able to have some language that goes out that makes some flexibility that's needed for states in making this law available and clarified. So I did get the sense that financial transparency is a priority for the new administration. It was a priority for the previous administration, and we've said this has been a bipartisan thing. So I don't see an attempt to get rid of this. What I do see is an attempt to make it doable by states. So that's what we heard, which I know is not definitive, but there is, I'll point out, there is a tension, and this, as long as there's more flexibility for states, this tension on timing might be even, more pushed down to you all, which is, do we take more time to allow for more accuracy, or do we try to get data out earlier and then it has more relevance, or there's more actionable data in the data set? And that is a tension that will likely get moved to the SEAs if there's more flexibility on the deadline. So do we wait till data are audited that we can have, we can adjust numbers to get the most accurate final numbers possible, or do we want data to come out earlier saying it's not audited, numbers could change, but potentially for the next year's budget, it makes it more actionable for districts and those in the system to do things that inform what they're doing. So that's a tension that I think will be there, especially around this deadline. Okay, that was our update on the deadline. So as we mentioned, we're going to have you look at some data reports today. And Katie found this one. I love this. When the Edunomics lab asks you to look at more data and reports. So hopefully, you guys are data and financing people and you enjoy some of this, but we get that we're asking a lot of you. So hopefully that's your fun one for today. But what we wanted to do was to create this. We have this list of questions. We worked on this with many of the CIOs at the CCSSO IMAC conference in Phoenix a few weeks ago. And I think there's a tiny bit of overlap between that group and this group, but we thought we would bring it back and have similar conversations with you all. And the idea here is that you have a list of questions. You're imagining most of these questions are potentially from a user. How much does my school spend per pupil? Is that more or less than other schools in my district? And the user would be looking at a visualization that a state created and trying to see if we can answer these questions with the visualization at hand. And the first visualization we wanted to give you, trying to give you real visualizations, is the one that we created with fake numbers, sort of fake. They're real, but they're not. These aren't the real names of places. And a visualization could look like this. It's kind of one of the bare minimum visualizations that said, I've reported spending by school, and you can see I have Maple, Cedar, and then Central District's LEA average. So it would be a static table. You can see visualization number one on the top is a static table showing all schools in all districts. Maybe the table just went on and on and on, I guess. And the idea is then to use, this is visualization number one, to use these questions to say, does visualization number one answer these? And you're probably going to have, for each one, kind of a yes, a no, or a sort of, or depends kind of thing. So, so you're not going to get always a clear yes or no on all these questions, but the questions hopefully are useful in thinking about the visualization. So if you could look at this visualization, and we'll just give you 2 or 3 minutes to run down the list of questions for visualization number one and say either kind of a yes, no, or a depends, or sort of, or whatever you want to say for that middle area, and answer these questions about whether or not you think that visualization, how well a job it does at answering these questions. So I'll stop talking for a second and give you a chance to do that. If you do the printout, that's a great way to just kind of mark them up. And if not, I'll kind of go back and forth a little bit on this on the screen so you can take a look.
And again, this is Katie. Sorry about the echo. I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah, you seem to be kind of going in and out, Katie.
Well, hopefully we'll get her back.
Yep. Alina asks, how can we print? So we, Katie, you should have an email from Katie right before the meeting that gave you these slides. So check your email. And Katie, it's Alina Morand. So if you want to send her an email again, then you can print them. One more minute and then we'll just start talking it through.
And we're in the process of unmuting everyone so that they can join the conversation and be interactive. So if you have background noise on your end that you don't want to have included in the conversation, go ahead and mute on your end, please.
Okay, so let's start with the very first question. If you're a user, does this visualization answer the question, how much does my school spend per pupil? Yeah, right? You can see like my kid goes to Maple Elementary, or I teach at Maple Elementary, or I'm a principal at Maple Elementary, and sure enough, we spend $14,841 per pupil. So that one's a yes, for sure. Is that more or less than schools in my district? Yeah, we can see that's actually more than Cedar Elementary, right? That would also be a yes. Is that more or less than other schools with similar demographics? So here's where it gets trickier. This visualization doesn't say anything about demographics. So the visualization itself as a static report, no, it doesn't. So that would be a no. Is it more or less than other schools within the state? And And here you can see the rest of the schools. So yeah, we can kind of look across the row and say, well, 14,000, yeah, that's more than some of these other ones. So that's probably a yes. This question number 5, does equitably? You know, what we can see is how much the other schools are getting in the district, but we don't have any more picture to say. So we might be able to say, are they divvying them up equally? But if we don't know if Cedar Elementary is a higher need school or a lower need school, and sort of whether or not the variations in spending match student needs or are really driven by anything else. So that one's kind of a sort of, right? We know some information across the district about how the funds are applied by each school, but we don't have any much more context to make that. So I would say it's probably a sort of. And what about the rest of these ones? Did anyone get yeses for the rest of the questions, sort of 6 through 11?
No.
Yeah, no, not really. It's not a lot of information on that one. It's a static report. So you can't, there's nothing about inputs, cost of services. Maybe number 8, you could say, well, I know what's spent centrally on some of these places. That's about it. But there's not a whole lot of other information in here. So it's really doing its best job probably of answering that very first question of how much does my school spend, and is it more or less? And I think the reason we're having people look at these data is to say, what do you want your data system to do for people? And so then you can take some of these questions and look at that. This is kind of the baseline one, but we're going to go into a few other ones. But any questions or comments on this? All right, well, if you're game, let's do the same thing for visualization number 2. And this one is a real report. Just to give you a quick overview of it. It's an LEA report. Again, it's a static report. It does give some more detail by function and object for all schools. And it lists all the schools in the district. So that's Stanley, MacArthur, Northeast, down in the lower left-hand corner. You can kind of see those. And in order to get a total, you have to add A, B, and C, which it does for you, off to the right to get a total spending. But you kind of see how it's broken out by different component parts. And Katie, is there anything else we want to share on this one?
Just that you would need to add together. Sorry, I don't know what's causing that echo.
Well, I don't hear the echo. We just hear you kind of stopping. So maybe the echo's on.
Well, that's great. If you can't hear it, then that's good. Yeah, just that you need to add together A, B, and C to get the total spending. That's kind of the main thing to point out.
Okay. And maybe the echo could be a headset. Sometimes for anybody, Katie, or anybody else, if you have a headset, that would be great. Because it looks like other people are hearing the echo too. So, so hopefully maybe somewhere out there, it's probably reverberating on someone's speaker and then coming back in. Probably, maybe yours, Katie. Okay, or maybe mine, I don't know. Okay, so we can jump into this. Is mine echoing too?
You're not echoing, but I think that we're grabbing your feed of other people talking. So we'll get you on a headset. Just keep going. I'll get the headset.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm going to put my headset on while we do this. Take a look at this one and see if you can go through and answer the questions as visualization number 2 while I put my own headset on.
And then we'll get to the question here. It says, what does the more about data link on the right-hand side show? We'll answer that in a minute.
That's a good catch. I see that. Katie, do you want to try talking? We'll see if the echo goes and you can describe what's what's there when it says more about data?
Sure, that's a great question. So this is actually a PDF that we received. So I don't know what that would go to. My hypothesis would be that that would go to a description of what is included in these calculations and just an explanation about the methods. But this was something that we received from a state that is not released yet to the public. So I don't know what that says yet.
Yeah, it might also include the year of the data and things like that, but we'll assume you have to go somewhere else. Right, okay.
And I've got another question from Jamie. What state provided this report? I am not going to say, but someone's on the call. If they want to chime in, they're welcome to own it if they'd like to. But I think we'll protect the privacy because it's not out yet.
I mean, I can say this is Rob O'Donnell from Massachusetts. This is our kind of mock-up school level report. And the more about the data link, you're right, just goes to sort of descriptions of the data sourcing and how the calculations are done. So.
Thanks, Rob.
So we have another question. Is transportation or capital expenditures included in this report? And I don't know if we know the answer to that, Katie.
I would hypothesize no, because it is instructional spending, so it might be counted in the non-instructional bucket. That's that subtotal A per pupil. But again, I would defer to Rob to explain that if you know, Rob.
Well, and I don't, I mean, you could go ahead and explain, but I think part of what we're trying to do is have people say like, oh, from the information I got on a visualization, like what do I know and what don't I know? Just to sort of practice sort of like, how does the user do that? So you could go ahead and explain, but I just want to remind people the point of the activity is not to have the person standing there explaining.
I can just say, so there are capital costs are not included in this.
But transportation probably is in operations maybe, or pupil services.
Yeah, right, that's right.
And some states will have definitions of those that are widely used, like so people know what pupil services are. The other question was about benefits. Are they allocated to the school level? Again, you don't have someone explaining the answers, but since we do have school-specific instructional expenditures on teachers, that probably includes benefits, or I would assume as a user of it.
Yeah, I don't know how much you want me to chime in, but the benefits are a district level cost, so they're not included at the school, at least in terms of how we collect the data. The benefits show up in that non-instructional spending box in the upper left. So we're allocating those costs, essentially.
Okay. Well, great. Let's go down the list. And you can see there's obviously this one, you can see how much you spent per pupil. You know more or less whether that's more or less than the other schools because they're listed from your district, so that you can see pretty quickly on all the way to the right that one school spends 19,000, another spends 17,000. So those are definitely yeses. And then what you see on this graph, I think they've added in demographics. So you have a little bit more of a picture because you have percent economically disadvantaged, percent ELL. Is it more or less than schools with similar demographics? So if those schools are in your district, yes, you can sort of answer that question. If you're looking how much your spending is compared to schools in other districts, they may not be on here. And I do want to, for Massachusetts' sake, is say that they have other reports that are part of their reporting feature. So we're kind of, saying like, what do you learn from one single report when we already know that the state has other reports too. So I don't want this even remotely to be any sort of judgment of Massachusetts. That would not be fair. We just wanted to use real life examples for this activity. So I hope that's okay. And does my district divvy up funds equitably? We have a better answer of that than on the previous one, right? Like we now know some of the demographic makeup of the schools, so we could see, if you happen to be a district, we could see that Stanley has a lot more ELL students. And in fact, Stanley has more total expenditures overall. So we can kind of lean to sort of better understanding the context for that questions. And then what is driving spending differences across schools? Within the district, we have this answer. We don't have school comparisons across districts here, but we can see some useful things like maybe the teacher cost is higher or the leadership costs are higher or things like that. And so there's some information there as well, giving you, at least a partial look on that. I think we're going to show you 4 examples where we don't know what's excluded. So we put that question in there because one of the things you'd want to do if you're using any of these reports, know that you're getting apples to apples. So if one is excluding something, the other ones are excluding it too. And I don't think any of the ones that we're giving you today will answer a yes on this exclusion question number 7. How does my school's spending on services compare to that of other schools? So we do have some information here. Like we can say, I know what we're spending on PD, other teaching services, things like that. Again, the limitation is we can't compare that to a school in a completely different district on this report. And so I think some of these are going to be yes, but only within districts, right? So that's a few of these other ones. And then when we get down to 10 and 11, these are ones that ask questions about student outcomes, that require student outcomes and spending, and we don't have that on this report. Any comments or reactions or questions for Rob since we have you here? But you can kind of see how the user might use one of these, particularly if they are static reports, that a static report has a lot of information on it, and there's probably much more complete information behind this report. But depending on what questions you want to answer, including different information on a static report gives you more to go on. Then again, the more you go on, the longer it probably takes to sort of digest whatever you see on each page. So benefits to that trade-off too.
Marguerite, I do have one follow-up question.
Yes,
for Rob. I'm curious, when your data closes down for that prior year to be able to do this, and how long it will take you to produce something like this with the different variables for every school in your state.
Yeah, so we have access to the student and staff data earlier than the finance data. So after the fiscal year closes, it takes. So right now we've collected FY16 data, and we're actually still kind of reviewing and editing that. We've produced some reports with it to date, but the finance data tends to lag by about a year behind the sort of the staffing and enrollment data. Maybe not quite that much, but so there is a bit of a lag in that. Does that answer your question?
It does, because that's really the same thing we struggle with.
Yeah.
So putting this up feels dated by the time we get it up there.
Yeah, we struggle with the same thing, but you know, we do the best we can, and we're trying to undertake some efforts to get the finance data out earlier.
Right.
You know, I don't know how much earlier. If we can shave a few months off of our ability to get this out, I think that would even help with budgeting and decision making.
Right.
Out in the field.
Thank
and that's
you.
the tension, right? That's that tension between
Exactly.
relevance, right?
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions or comments on this one? Let's jump in the next one. Visualization number 3 is a static report for a single school. So basically, you could type in your school's name into the system and find this report. And it includes some teacher information, even some detail by function, object, and state, and LEA averages off to the right. So let's see what happens when we go to answer these questions. I'll give you a minute to kind of go through them.
And just to anticipate some of the same questions as before, this is Louisiana, and this is actually just 2 snippets of the whole report. It's a little bit longer. It doesn't fit perfectly on a slide, so I had to cut it a little bit. But these are Louisiana reports, and they've been online, I think, since, I want to say 2009. Could be a little bit off there, but for a number of years they've had these. Just got a question from Jamie asking, what are other states doing with private contributions or donations? I don't know if anyone's on the call and wants to chime in on that one, particularly maybe Rob or Beth from Louisiana, if you have any idea about how you think about private donations or contributions when you're reporting this kind of information.
I mean, we get this question a lot. We've just been working with the RCCs in the last couple days around this kind of stuff, and there are a lot of questions around private contributions. This, I think, a concern that if we don't have them, we're really distorting the data. At the same time, if we, they're hard to capture, right? Because they may not ever pass through a school district's funding or accounts. They could be spent by a separate organization, and the students could still benefit. Often they think that that's harder for them to hire staff or something, but you could see how you could just get a physical delivery of computers and have it never go on the books. So I would say here, the federal law requires expenditures for the public funds. It is silent on the private money, and so states can do what they choose on that one.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'll say for us, for Massachusetts, we do capture spending from private grants, which I think would capture those private financial contributions that districts get. So, and that is included in the report that was just shown. but in terms of material, contributions, we wouldn't have any way of collecting that information.
Yeah, it's an age-old problem, because if you have parent volunteers who will do the crosswalk, and your school then doesn't have to pay for a crosswalk guard, you can have a completely off the books donation of time that does affect the operation of the school and frees up money for other uses. So there's no way to get it completely pinpointed. But let's take a look at some of these questions. So this one's a single school, right? So it doesn't show all the schools in the district. However, it does give you the LEA average. They're up in the corner, and it gives you the state average. So there is a little bit of what's going on at other schools. So the first thing I would point out, though, how much does my school spend per pupil? And I'm not 100% sure I'm reading these right, but I think you have to sum the $10,000 figure, which is the expenditures per pupil, plus the central office one to get that number. So it's there, but some work has to be done for that, unless the expenditures per pupil includes the central office, and that's just a breakout. So we weren't sure on that one. How much is that, more or less than schools in my districts? Well, I can't find another school using this report, but I can tell you if it's higher or lower than the district average. So that's, again, a little bit of a sort of. Is it more or less than other schools with similar student demographics? Well, we have some good demographic information here, right? We have some great information, enrollment information. We can tell if a school is a big school or a small school or things like that. But we don't have that for the comparable ones. And really, this is kind of more of a school-centric report. Is it more or less, number 4, than other schools within the same state? Well, we do know it's more or less than the average. What we can't really do is sort of get the range or see the spectrum using the static report. Does my district divvy up funds equitably? Again, all I know is what my school spends and what the average is. If my school is around the average, we don't really know it's equitable. The rest of them could be off the average. I guess you just don't quite have that lens when you're looking at a single school. Again, we mentioned the exclusions piece here. I don't think we gave you any examples that have a lot of detail on that, at least from what we cut, and we may have cut some of that information off. How does my school's spending on services compare to that of other schools? So here you do this breakout of, again, instructional support, school administration, and while you have that, you also have it for the LEA and the state average. So you do have some insight onto these objects and functions for some of these questions, including the inputs one, because we have here the number of teachers, so we can kind of look at some of those component pieces as well. But 10 and 11, we don't have that information because, again, there are no student outcomes data as part of this visualization. Any questions or comments on that? We have one more, and some of you will remember this from previous activities that we've done, Visualization 4. This is actually, I mean, it's not interactive on your paper or on the webinar, but there is an interactive tool where the schools, of all the schools in the state, and you can filter, you can limit your district, you can expand your district, and you can filter based on student, school, and district characteristics, as well as student outcomes. So it has student outcomes there on the left. You can see that you can click on a single school in this model and get some information. But it's hard to see two schools at the same time. So we can't really do is quite line them up next to each other, but you could go get that. And take a look at the visualization questions for number 4 and see what that answers.
And you are unmuted, I think, if that's what you had your hand up for.
No, sorry.
Okay.
All right, so let's take a look at some of these. How much does my school spend per pupil? Yes. Is it more or less than other schools in my district? You put the filter on your district, and you can see the, sort of what everybody spends in the aggregate. Is it more or less than schools with similar student demographics? This one, yes on that, because we have the demographics there on the other scale. And if you came to our first in-person meeting, you might remember we played around with this visualization a little bit and had uploaded Rhode Island data into it. And so there was this opportunity to kind of like sift through the data. So is it more or less than schools with similar student demographics? You'd have to use the interactive filters to sort of set the parameters of the demographics you're interested in, but then you can choose to look at all high poverty schools or high poverty elementary schools and kind of look at the range there as well. And yeah, you can expand it to the whole state. So now this question of, does my district divvy up funds equitably? You would narrow it by your district. You'd see where the schools are, and you'd have to mouse over each school to kind of look at the different demographics of those to see if all the ones, let's say you're looking in the upper half of the screen in the Q1 or Q2 sections. Do those schools have higher needs than the ones in the Q3, Q4? Do they have lower needs? And you kind of have to do a little bit of a scan of that. But it won't pull that out automatically for you. What is driving spending differences across schools? So I think, one of the limitations, you're really looking at one school at a time. I think you could build it to try to click on two schools and have it compare them, or lasso a set of schools, like put a box around a whole set of schools, maybe all the ones in Q2 to see how they compare to yours, and see what the spending differences are. But generally, the way this one is working, you'd mouse over one and you'd see that box on the right. And so you'd still have to do a little bit of work to kind of remember what was in the different boxes as you went through the data set. Nothing on the exclusions. Number 8, how does my school's spending on services compare? Here again, similar with the inputs, we would have to kind of mouse over several boxes to sort of see, was my transportation number higher or lower than some of the other ones. And maybe a good feature would be something that allowed you to kind of select a set of comparable peers and then go to another page where you look at all those comparisons at the same time. And then this one doesn't have as much on inputs. It has mostly the services, but not like sort of what the teacher salary was or the benefits rate or something like that. But if you look at 10 and 11, I think this one is the one we could find that allows you to kind of digest the outcomes of the schools at the same time you're looking at the finances. So you could start to say, are there schools here I want to learn from, or can I benchmark my school's ability to turn money into outcomes? And I could do that against comparable peers. I think that's why we put this one up there, but there may be some questions or comments, so I'll stop for a moment. So again, in terms of the task of putting things together, this requires the integration of another bunch of data, and namely outcomes data for that. So I think that's part of what we thought we would illustrate, is that if you look at these first few questions, they're really more like, what is the spending? It's just finance data. Pretty quickly we start saying, if I want to know a little bit more, particularly about equity, then I'm going to need to know some stuff around student demographics. Then when you get into 6, 8, 9, you're actually looking for more and richer detail on the spending. I need objects, I need functions, things like that. And we get into 10, 11, those are questions about productivity. And then I'm going to need outcomes. So when you may remember, we had these buckets of data that you could sort of include. You had this baseline information, but if you wanted to put in expenditures by student type or report that could enrich in equity, you could add expenditures by object or function. That helps you with efficiency, those kinds of trade-offs questions. You add in student outcomes data, and that's when you're able to get comparisons that inform productivity or sort of drive productivity improvements. And the more you add, for one, the report gets more complex. You almost need to pull in something that allows the user to kind of filter, like we said, or to draw in a way what they need to draw. That's when you get kind of these data questions, these reports that will potentially answer more questions. And I wonder if any of the states that have been doing this for a while want to chime in on your thinking or where you're headed next. Or maybe even, is this useful for you? Like, so we started off this activity with, do you have goals for what the users can do with the information, and what questions do you want the visualizations to answer? So we took a stab at a set of these, and I wonder, do you all have other questions that are on your list? Is this useful for you, or do you have different goals completely for what you hope the users can do with the information?
Marguerite, this is Cindy.
Yes,
I think this is a great start. And I think that what we're going to find is this is more than enough for the average user to start with. And then once they become comfortable with the data, that will lead us to more questions that they want answers to. But I think, you know, for us, we're starting with the financial data initially, and then we're going to begin the links to other data sets, such as outcomes, but we need the user friendly on the data itself, and then probably do some static reports in combination with that, with some high level staff and student data. But it's going to take
Makes
time
sense.
for them to adjust to that.
Yeah, definitely. And I sometimes think, you know, I was at Education Writers Association a week ago, and the journalists all want to know, what stories should I be writing? And I said, well, when all the financial transparency data comes out, and you could, maybe you do the homework and figure out who are the high productivity schools, right? The schools that spend the average, don't spend more than the average, but really beat the odds for the results. And then I almost think there's no data system that can answer everybody's questions. Like, how do they do it? Maybe it's more of a narrative, right? Like we do the same things a lot of other people do. We just really value human beings. We spend a lot of time thinking about our kids, you know, whatever it is, whatever they have. So I think in some ways, we're never going to get to a point where data answers all the questions. Sometimes the human parts of this are so big, but I think we may not have to answer it on every school. Maybe the most interesting stuff is on the really high productivity schools, the ones that are beating the odds. Like, if we can drill down and write a case study about a school in, Johnsonville that really beats the odds for its mix of students, we just write up what they do and publish their data, and the other ones can kind of go compare themselves to that one productivity superstar, or like 5 productivity superstars. But thank you, Cindy. I think there is a sequencing to this, and the sequence might be different in different districts or different states, but it is a lot of information, and not everybody's used to it yet. Let's see, I think we may have a hand raise.
Beth, you are.
Yeah, Beth, you can go ahead.
Well, we can't hear you, so maybe you want to type your question in. Maybe there's a speaker issue on your side. Any other questions or comments? So another possibility, take the checklist and work with your CIOs, or the ones that are also probably helping on the visualizations, to say, let's go through and figure out what we want ours to do. What purpose do we want our information system to serve?
So there's a question here from Lisa. I agree with the need for sequencing, and also think that there need to be different types of visualizations for different audiences.
Great point. Is that, you can imagine a parent or might be doing one thing, a principal might be doing another, a school board member might be doing a different one entirely. So I think that's a really great point, is to sort of think about these users. And you can even imagine how we tried to put these questions in the lens of somebody sort of who might be asking a question, but you can imagine they'll ask different questions. And so, directing people to data systems that are useful for them, even better. We don't have that all figured out. So we're just trying to put information on the table for this group to help us all uncover it together. Excellent point. Any other questions or comments? We just have a couple of really quick updates. And then we'll let you, go about your day. One is that we have some, you can choose some one-on-ones with the Edgeonomics Lab, and Katie, maybe you can describe those.
Yeah, if you'd like to just have a TA call, like if you're working through, your state's procedure on this, or if you're thinking about reaching out to LEAs to, make them aware of this requirement that's coming up, or any changes they need to make, or anywhere you are in the process, if you want to have a conversation with us just one-on-one, kind of like an office hours kind of talk, individual technical assistance, just let me know. You can either type it in the question box and I can see and I can get in touch with you, or you can just send me an email.
Great. And our next meeting, June 20th, what we want to talk about, and we're going to be kind of reaching out to a few of the states that we know have worked on this, is how are states working with LEAs? Like, what format does that take? Do you have in-person meetings? Do you share reports from them? What reactions are you getting from them? And what have you learned from that you could share with others? So that's our next meeting. And lastly, we just want to let you know that there's some BSCP resources available online. You may remember that when we were working sort of in the official capacity from the Department of Ed, it was through the BSCP Center. And we've been capturing some of the materials we've done with you all and making publications out of them, including the data inventory, a piece on moving from inventory to action, sort of how to get your data. There's a scatter plot activity we did in person with many of you. So those things are available if you want to download them from the BSCP website. And we'll probably try to take this activity and make it into something that is available for states beyond this group, or if you want to use it again. And for that reason, would love any feedback at all you have on what we covered today in this hour, because we will incorporate it and try to make something better. So hopefully that was doable. Also, let us know if you think of it, how this worked for you, to kind of do something that involved a printout and sort of writing things down as we went. If that worked or just doesn't work on the webinar format, that would be useful for us as well. And other than that, any questions or comments, or otherwise you are all free to go.